The British entered World War II with tanks that were tested under real fire, not perfect plans. You and I both know war never waits for perfect ideas to catch up. These machines were thrown straight into chaos, patched up between fights, and driven by crews who trusted steel more than chance. Now imagine cold mornings, engines shaking the hull, mud clinging to everything, and no real way back once things started. Nobody built these tanks to impress anyone watching from afar. They were built to keep rolling until the job was finished. And today, we're walking through the British tanks that earned their reputation one battle at a time. So let's start the story with Matilda I forget power for a moment and imagine a confidence built on nothing but armor and nerve. The Matilda I entered the war carrying only a machine gun, which already tells you how different early thinking was. No cannon, no heavy punch, just thick armor for its time, and crews expected to get close enough to matter. During the Battle of France, this tank surprised German forces who struggled to penetrate its armor with standard weapons. Inside, conditions were rough, visibility was poor, and offensive options were painfully limited. Still, crews pushed forward because retreat was rarely an option. The Matilda I was never meant to last long in a modern war, and it didn't. But in its brief combat life, it proved a hard truth. Protection could buy time, confusion, and opportunity, even when firepower lagged. It stands as a reminder of how quickly warfare outgrew early assumptions. Matilda II. Well, this tank is not about speed or style, and you feel that the moment you picture it rolling forward. The Matilda II moved slowly, almost stubbornly, but its armor told a different story. Early in the war, German guns struggled to crack it, especially in France and North Africa. Thick steel wrapped around the hull, giving crews rare confidence when most tanks felt fragile. The 2-pounder gun could punch through enemy armor at the time, even if it lacked high explosive rounds for softer targets. Inside, conditions were tight and loud, but survivability mattered more than comfort. As the war progressed, stronger enemy weapons exposed its limits, and upgrades could not keep pace forever. Still, during those early battles, the Matilda II changed how opponents approached British armor. It did not rush the battlefield. It absorbed it, endured it, and forced enemies to rethink their shots. Valentine. Imagine a tank that never asked for attention, yet showed up everywhere it was needed. The Valentine was compact, quietly tough, and built with reliability in mind. Its low profile made it harder to spot, while its armor protected crews better than its size suggested. Early versions carried the 2-pounder gun, later upgraded to the 6-pounder as threats increased. Crews often complained about cramped interiors, but breakdowns were rare, and that mattered more in long campaigns. Valentines fought in North Africa, Europe, and even on the Eastern Front through Lend-Lease. Mechanics respected how simple it was to maintain, even under harsh conditions. It never dominated headlines, but numbers told the real story. Thousands were produced, and thousands were used. The Valentine earned trust by doing exactly what it promised, rolling forward, firing when needed, and bringing crews back alive. Churchill infantry tank. All right, picture a tank that looks heavy even when standing still. The Churchill was built for one thing: surviving brutal terrain under direct fire. Early versions suffered from mechanical problems, and crews paid the price during first deployments. But once those issues were corrected, the Churchill became something else entirely. Its thick armor, Unusual track layout and ability to climb steep obstacles made it invaluable in places like Italy and Normandy. Armed first with smaller guns, then upgraded to 6-pounder and 75mm weapons, it slowly gained real striking power. Engineers even adapted it into specialized variants for engineering and assault roles. Speed was never its strength, but endurance was. When other tanks struggled with rubble, mud, or fortified ground, the Churchill kept moving. It earned respect not through elegance, but by refusing to stop when conditions turned unforgiving. Cromwell. The Cromwell finally gave British forces the speed they had been chasing for years. Powered by a strong engine, it could move quickly across open ground while keeping a low, compact shape. Its 75mm gun handled infantry and light armor effectively, even if heavier enemy tanks required smarter tactics. Armor protection was balanced rather than excessive, prioritizing mobility over brute strength. In Normandy and across northwest Europe, Cromwells worked best when used aggressively, exploiting gaps and flanking slower opponents. Crews appreciated the smoother handling and improved reliability compared to earlier cruiser designs. It was not perfect, but it felt modern. The Cromwell marked a turning point, showing that British tanks could move fast, fight smart, and stay effective without falling apart under pressure. Crusader. Can you think about a tank that carried big expectations and constant frustration at the same time? That feeling followed the Crusaders everywhere they went in North Africa. Built around speed, it was meant to outmaneuver the enemy across wide desert spaces rather than face them head-on. Early versions relied on the 2-pounder gun, which worked well at first, but rising enemy armor forced later upgrades to the 6-pounder. On paper, the Crusader looked like the future. In the field, it tested everyone's patience. Engines overheated under desert heat, sand chewed through components, and maintenance crews were always racing against time. Breakdowns were common, sometimes arriving before enemy fire. Even so, Crusaders fought in some of the most important desert battles of the war. Crews adapted, compensated, and kept pushing forward because there were few better options. The tank was fast, bold, and fragile, but it stayed present long enough to shape outcomes. The Crusader taught a painful lesson. Speed mattered, but survival demanded more than motion alone. Comet now. Pause for a second and think about the British tank that finally feels complete. The Comet arrived late, but it carried the weight of every mistake made before it. Armor was better shaped, not just thicker. Speed felt controlled instead of reckless. Its 77mm gun, derived from the famous 17-pounder, gave crews real confidence against German armor without sacrificing balance. Inside, layouts were improved, making the tank easier to fight for long hours. When the Comets reached northwest Europe, they immediately stood out. Crews trusted them to move, fire, and survive without constant mechanical drama. Enemy tanks no longer felt untouchable. The Comet did not need brute force to prove itself. It relied on smart design and battlefield awareness. Although it arrived too late to change the entire war, it showed what British tank design had been building toward all along. And now let's talk about Challenger, A30. Your thoughts almost trip when you first see this one. The Challenger looked awkward, tall, and stretched beyond comfort, but that shape had a purpose. British engineers wanted one thing inside that turret: the powerful 17-pounder gun. To make room, armor protection had to be sacrificed, leaving crews exposed in exchange for firepower. On the battlefield, Challenger units stayed back, picking targets carefully rather than charging forward. When the gun spoke, German armor listened. The tank demanded discipline, positioning, and patience. Mistakes were costly. It was not forgiving, but it was effective when used properly. Crews understood they were carrying a weapon more than a shield. The Challenger never pretended to be versatile. It existed to solve a specific problem, and when that moment came, it delivered exactly what it was built to do. Tetrarch. The Tetrarch was light, fast, and small enough to be carried by air. That alone set it apart. Armor protection was minimal, and survival depended on movement rather than resistance. Armed with a 2-pounder gun, it was never meant to duel heavy tanks. Instead, it supported reconnaissance and airborne operations where heavier vehicles could not go. Tetrarch saw action in places like Madagascar and during airborne landings on D-Day. Crews treated it carefully, knowing one mistake could end everything quickly. Still, its presence gave airborne forces something armored to lean on. It was not built for glory or domination. The Tetrarch existed because sometimes speed, timing, and surprise mattered more than steel thickness. Covenanter. As the name suggests, expectations were high, but reality landed hard. The Covenanter looked modern and promising on paper, yet it struggled the moment real conditions entered the picture. Cooling issues plagued the engine, especially in warmer climates, limiting its usefulness in combat zones. Most Covenanters never reached frontline battles, spending their time training crews instead. That does not mean it was meaningless. Drivers learned handling, gunners practiced coordination, and mechanics learned painful lessons about design flaws. Every hour spent inside a Covenanter shaped how later tanks were improved. It became a quiet classroom rather than a frontline weapon. The tank's legacy lives in what followed, not where it fought. Sometimes progress comes from failure, and the Covenanter paid that price so better machines could survive real combat. Sherman Firefly. Nothing about this tank feels subtle once you understand what it carried. The Sherman Firefly took a familiar shape and turned it into something dangerous. By mounting the powerful 17-pounder gun, British crews finally had a weapon that could face German heavy armor without hesitation. The modification was awkward. Ammunition storage changed, the turret balance shifted, and the long barrel made concealment harder. None of that mattered once combat began. Fireflies were often positioned carefully among standard Shermans, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. German crews learned to fear that silhouette. Armor protection stayed the same, which meant survival depended on teamwork and smart positioning. In Normandy and the fighting beyond, the Firefly restored balance where it had been missing. It did not overwhelm through numbers. It changed outcomes through capability, precision, and confidence. Centaur. Can you believe a tank that never tried to pick a single identity and simply worked within its limits? That was the Centaur. It looked almost identical to the Cromwell at first glance, sharing the same hull and overall shape, but the engine told a different story. Without the power that made the Cromwell fast, the Centaur settled into a steadier, more deliberate role. Armed with either a 75mm gun or a howitzer, it focused less on rapid movement and more on controlled fire support. During the Normandy landings, Centaurs were positioned to hammer fortified German defenses, clearing paths for infantry and faster tanks to advance. Crews learned to rely on careful placement, timing, and coordination rather than speed. It never chased glory or headlines. Its value came from reliability and purpose. The Centaur proves that not every tank has to rush forward. Some mattered most by holding ground, breaking defenses, and quietly shaping the battlefield for others to move through. All right, let's move to cruiser MKIs, A9. Go back to a time when Britain was still guessing what modern armored warfare was supposed to feel like in real combat. The A9 cruiser MKI was born from that uncertainty. It carried a proper gun, moved faster than infantry tanks, and looked confident on paper, almost daring in its design. Once the battle began, reality set in quickly. Light armor left crews exposed, and survival depended on constant movement rather than protection. In France and North Africa, that lesson came fast and often brutally. A single well-placed hit could end everything. Crews learned to keep moving, repositioning before the enemy could react. What the A9 lacked in toughness, it made up for in education. It forced commanders and crews to think differently about speed, timing, and coordination. Tanks were no longer slow-moving shields. They became tools of maneuver. The A9 did not survive long in frontline service, but it reshaped British thinking when it mattered most. Cruiser MK Taus, A10. This tank feels like Britain taking a breath and bracing for impact. The A10 cruiser MK2 was not about chasing speed anymore. It was about lasting a little longer once the shooting started. Extra armor was added where it mattered most, even though everyone knew that meant sacrificing mobility. Crews felt the difference immediately. The tank moved more slowly, turned wider, and demanded patience. Still, that added protection mattered in France and early North Africa, where lighter cruisers disappeared quickly under fire. Armed with the familiar 2-pounder gun, the A10 did not dominate engagements, but it stayed present in them. It absorbed hits that would have ended earlier designs. Often deployed alongside faster tanks, it played the role of steady support rather than spearhead. The A10 was not bold or exciting. It was practical. In a war that punished hesitation, it provided something rare at the time, a margin for survival. Cruiser Mukka III, A13. Here is where momentum finally takes control. The A13 cruiser Mukka III was built with speed as its backbone, and everything else followed that decision. Improved suspension transformed how it moved across broken ground, giving drivers confidence they had never felt before. This tank could reposition quickly, exploit gaps, and disengage before fire became overwhelming. Armor remained thin, and crews knew better than to linger. The 2-pounder gun was effective when paired with movement and timing, not brute force. In France and across North Africa, A13s were pushed aggressively, sometimes beyond their limits. Losses came fast, but clarity came faster. This design proved that mobility could shape battles, not just survive them. The A13 was unforgiving, but it finally aligned British cruiser doctrine with battlefield reality. From this point forward, speed was no longer an experiment. It became a deliberate weapon. And with that, we have reached the end of the video. Hope you like our listing. Just make sure to press the subscribe button for our future videos. Thanks for watching and giving us your valuable time.